So over on How to Drink, I've been talking a lot about Fallout lately. I did Nuka-Cola, I've been hanging out with Tim Kaine, there's a long interview that I did with Tim Kaine, there's even more of that to come in the future. I think Fallout, we're gonna be doing a lot of Fallout over there. There's a lot of discourse online about Fallout, about its impact on gaming, and about its development, and about the lore, but I want to talk about something a little bit different. I want to talk about what it was like to discover Fallout in 1997, because there was nothing like Fallout before Fallout. So it's 1997. The pants are big, the hair is spiky, there's ball chains everywhere, and I'm probably wearing a mesh shirt filled with safety pins or something and obnoxious.
I told you to rewind that!
And I'm with my friends walking around a store called Nobody Beats the Wiz.
Pay no money down, no payments, and no interest.
Nobody Beats the Wiz was an appliance and electronics sort of, I don't know, predecessor to Best Buy that I guess existed only in the Northeast and is now out of business. And in 1997, probably holding on by a thread, and they sell everything. So they have an aisle full of computer games, and every once in a while you'd walk up the aisle and see what's new. And you had to kind of do that, or at least I did, because there was no hype cycle for things back then. There was no YouTube, there was no Instagram Reels or TikTok. The only way to find out about what was going on with games was either honestly through TV and radio commercials, or if you happened to be, into PC Gamer, or I'm trying to think of the other magazines, like physical print magazines that were around. And I wasn't, because they were expensive as hell. To the extent that we read them, we would hang out at Barnes & Noble, which was next door to Nobody Beats the Wiz, and pretend we were gonna buy a magazine, but just sit there and read a magazine, maybe have a coffee with it. So we didn't really know what was coming out or what was going on until we, a lot of times, saw it on the shelf. And so I was walking around Nobody Beats the Wiz, just looking at the game, seeing if there was anything that was cool. And I distinctly remember seeing out of the corner of my eye the box art for Fallout. And let me tell you something, I had really never seen anything like this in my life. Because first off, you have this powered armor helmet, this helmet that, the T-51B power armor helmet. And immediately I recognized that as some kind of armor or power armor, right? Because I'd played Warhammer 40,000 at that point, but I was like, this is not a Space Marine, what is this thing? It kind of looks like a gas mask or like hazmat equipment that's been armored. And I think that's a little bit lost in the modern iterations on power armor, by the way. But that first one definitely had design elements in it that immediately called to mind Cold War nuclear fears, instantly. You've got this powered armor thing, and then behind the power armor is this destroyed cityscape, this desolate wasteland, this collapsed civilization. It was so compelling, this art. I mean, I don't know off the top of my head who did the art for the box, but kudos. And then it says, up on top, Fallout, a post-nuclear RPG. Up until that point, RPG had meant one of two things to me, right? An RPG that I played as a video game on a console, and yes, on a console, because although there were PC-based RPGs around, I, for some reason, hadn't encountered them. But on a console, it meant what we now call a JRPG, right? It meant something made by Square Enix, which is fine, but, in technical terms, it's really hard to call that a role-playing game. It's more of an interactive novel, a mildly interactive novel. It's more like a novel with a tactical fighting strategy game on it, where you have skill checks to read the next chapter, like player skill checks, and advancement and stuff like that. But role-playing game, I mean, you're not really playing a role, right? You're not making a whole lot of substantive role-playing like decisions. And then just recently, because I guess I came to it a little bit late, about 1995 or 1996, I started playing Dungeons & Dragons with some friends. And so that experience told me what a role-playing game really could be, right? Where you can just do anything. You can make any character you want, and you have this freedom to do anything, and we'll figure out how the rules adjudicate that. And that was insane to me. That was the coolest experience. Finding that, and maybe I should do another video on that, was just holy shit, this is unfucking real. And so here I am looking at this box art for a computer game that says Fallout, a post-nuclear RPG. And a lot of things are happening in my head at once. First off, this is a computer game that's also a role-playing game. I'd seen role-playing games on consoles, I just happened to have not seen them on computers. What should I expect from that? And two, post-nuclear. To me, up until that point, role-playing game meant fantasy. It might have meant a couple different flavors of fantasy, but it was distinctly couched in flavors of medieval Europe, right? That was the role-playing game aesthetic, with the exception of something like Dark Sun, which happened to have actually been the first campaign setting I played D&D in, which was Conan the Barbarian with bugmen, basically. And so this is something I've never seen before. This is a computer RPG, and an RPG that's not fantasy-based. So I scrounged around in my pockets. I might have had to borrow $1 or $2 from some friends. I was frequently borrowing money from friends back then because I was a poor kid. So I brought that game home, opened the box. What a cool kit came in that box. You know, there was the Vault Dweller's survival guide. There may have been a couple of other little bits of ephemera and stuff like that. You know, honestly, I really wish I still had all of that. I'm not a collector, but I might jump on eBay and buy an original box just to have all of those wonderful little doodads again. And so you had to install the game. You put the CD-ROM in, you start the installer, maybe there was a few options to pick from, and you install the game, and then you can start it. And my mind is immediately blown upon starting this game. The Interplay logo feeding into the world news thing, music, the black and white film reel, and there's the power armor that I saw in the box, and the annexation of Canada, and we're executing prisoners in the street and laughing for the camera, and we're pulling back, and this music is playing, and as we're pulling back, I am more and more drawn in. We get to the city, and the television, and the decay, and then...
War never changes.
This incredible narration starts, and this is like a fucking movie, right? We have a credit sequence at the beginning of the game, and narration by whom I now know, of course, is Ron Perlman. At the time, Ron Perlman wasn't really a household name. It was a voice I might have sort of recognized, but I had not been into Beauty and the Beast quite enough when I was a little bit younger to recognize Ron Perlman's voice immediately, and I doubt many people were, to be honest. Nonetheless, there is this unbelievable narration, this wonderful voice, and we have this montage of images, and I don't know if you've ever seen The Road Warrior, but I loved The Road Warrior, and if you haven't seen The Road Warrior, you really should see The Road Warrior. There's a similar montage at the very beginning of that movie.
Gone now, swept away. For reasons long forgotten, two mighty warrior tribes went to war and touched off a blaze which engulfed them all.
I love Fallout, but they're heavily cribbing from The Road Warrior in this montage. But that's perfect for me. That's perfect. I'm being totally sucked into, holy shit, I'm gonna get to play The Road Warrior. Woo, what is happening? This is exciting. It's worth noting too that this was incredibly well done. I mean, CD-ROMs were relatively new to becoming sort of mainstream. I mean, it was not more than a year. I was probably still installing some games by floppy disk in '97. Maybe not. Maybe within a year or two, the floppy disk had died. And so the ability to have this much data on a disk, the high quality audio, the high quality voice recording, the pre-rendered videos, the graphics, right? The computers that those had to be rendered on and stuff like that, that was all relatively new. So it is true to say that, like, I don't think I or anybody else had ever seen anything like this or heard anything like this game before in our lives. And this is where the team behind Fallout was really pushing the limits and redefining the medium of video games. I'm gonna talk more about that in a minute. Right now, I just want to point out that I am blown away, sucked in to what feels like is gonna be the coolest movie I've ever witnessed in my life, and yet it's a role-playing game and it's not a movie. And then it asked me to do something incredible that I had never had a computer game ask me to do before. It asked me to make a character. And not just pick a few combat stats or whatever, or weapon specialization or something like that, but to truly make a character. Immediately, this is recognizable to me as being like Dungeons & Dragons. Of course, it is its own system, special, and it was mostly inspired by GURPS, which I had never played, actually. But nonetheless, here are a whole bunch of skills. Not all of them are combat related at all. Here are every stat that you could imagine. And then a few other weird options too, you know, small frame, heavy-handed, finesse, quick draw. And so I make a character, and then I am being spoken to by the Overseer, finding out the situation here.
We've got a problem, a big one.
And sent out into the world with a mission and a black map. One destination on it, Vault 15, and that's it. Very quickly you realize you can go in any direction you want on this map. Most people are gonna click Vault 15, head towards Vault 15, and notice a settlement on the way. And by the time you see that settlement on the way, you've been attacked so many times by so many random encounters that you really have very little choice but to stop at Shady Sands and meet Aradesh. And there's an actor I do remember immediately recognizing.
Greetings.
Because, oh, it's that guy from Wings.
Thank you. Enjoy the funeral.
He was that guy from Wings at that time. He was yet to become Tony Shalhoub. And Tandy.
My name's Tandy. What's yours?
I don't know if I recognized was Penny from Inspector Gadget yet, but
Do what you can, Brain. I'll find a way in.
Cree Summer has done thousands of voices. She's like every voice, you know. And there is just so much going on, and you can explore it all. And it's very clear that talking to these people in different ways is producing different results. They don't just have a bank of information to dump on you. It really, truly, at this point, felt not like I was playing through a story somebody else had written, which of course I was, but like I was writing a story through playing, that this was happening live, that nobody had ever sat down to write it. And I know that's a really naive thing to say, but that is what it was like to be 15 years old and playing Fallout in 1997. It's really hard for me to overstate how immersive the experience of playing Fallout was. If you look back now and you didn't grow up with games like this and these kinds of graphics, you're gonna laugh at me, but recall that novels are very immersive too, and there's no graphics there at all. In fact, I think that games with less evolved graphics can be a lot more immersive because they rely on the same effect that a novel does, which is for your brain, your imagination, to fill in a lot of those blanks. As good as the voice actors are in Fallout, and they really are good in Fallout, the voice actor in your mind is probably always going to be better. You physically can't translate that to come out of your mouth, but what you hear in your mind is probably better. The game had asked you to make your character, to define your place in this world and inhabit that person, and that immediately you have the exact same connection to that as you do in Dungeons & Dragons or any other tabletop role-playing game, which, by the way, back then we called pen and paper role-playing games. I don't know if anybody else knows that. You are exploring this world for the first time, uncovering it like an archaeologist or something, and meeting all of these characters who are fully realized. They have their own motivations, they have their own backstories, and you really got the impression that there was a well-thought-out backstory there, even if, you know, there was no reason for anybody to share that with you. It would have been hacky exposition if they had. It was there. In fact, there was a button called Tell Me About.
Yes. It is a rumor of a monster created during the war,
Which allowed you to ask for those kinds of details if you so desired. And it made that sense of conversation feel so much more real. Everything in this world was thought out by a phenomenal dungeon master, essentially. You go to Shady Sands and pop one screen over and there's the farms. You know, they know where the food is coming from. They know where these people go to the bathroom. They know who they trade with. The people who wrote the game, and I'm going to say Tim Kaine, but also all of the other people who had a hand in that, it's all connected and well thought out. At no point did the game, for me, ask me to stretch my suspension of disbelief to the breaking point, right? There was nothing in this game that you felt like you just had to hand wave and be like, well, whatever. You know, yeah, it's a world where radiation turns people into ghouls and there are super mutants, but it's flavored in such a way that you buy into it. It's a world that reinforces that idea and it feels right. You know, this retro future. And I maintain a dystopian kind of cyberpunk element. There was a lot of the Road Warrior and Mad Max in that. It was like a retro future collapsed into Mad Max, and so you actually get this fusion of the two. In some ways, I feel like Bethesda has kind of moved away from that. I don't know why, but it's just a vibe I get. The experience of playing Fallout was so far away from any computer or video game role-playing game I'd ever played up until that point. Those JRPGs, this was just nothing like that. And a lot of those are very well written. I love Chrono Trigger to this day. Final Fantasy VI, favorites of mine, you know, especially with the nostalgia, through the lens of nostalgia. But they really never felt like a world that I was inhabiting. The thing that felt most like Fallout to me up until that point, other than Dungeons and Dragons, were choose your own adventure novels, which are novels, and they're very clearly structured, right? You know that there's not a element of emergent storytelling there, right? Like there's nothing randomized, like it is all scripted, and you're making choices through it, but your choices have huge impact. You can lose in a choose-your-own-adventure novel, which is a big feature of Fallout that set it apart from a lot of other games, particularly games that are made now. But also, it's relying on the power of the mind the way a novel does. So you have all of the immersion that you can get from a well-written novel, sometimes in the case of choose-your-own-adventure books, and the agency that comes from a role-playing game that has consequences. I was reading those books when I was in grade school, quite young, 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade. But there are like places in those books that are embedded in the parts of my brain that are like linked to geography, those like deep core memories. If you ever read about memory palacing, you would know what I'm talking about. And like, they just feel real. They are like fictional places that occupy parts of my brain where real places are stored. Fallout feels the same way. A lot of times when I start up a new game of Fallout or Fallout 2, I do feel a sense of like going back to a town I haven't been to in a long time. And a town, like a place, as opposed to watching a show that I have nostalgia for, like the X-Files or something. It's a very special kind of thing. And I know I wasn't the only person to experience that, because Fallout, from a 30-person team with a pretty meager budget and 8-bit graphics, has turned into an empire. It is one of the pillars that is fueling Bethesda, one of the biggest game companies around. It is a hugely successful show on Amazon Prime that I think is fantastic, by the way. And in order for Fallout to build the kind of empire it did, much like Star Wars has, that original game had to powerfully, like spiritually connect with the people who played with it, the way that A New Hope did when it came out in theaters. It was a phenom. Perhaps not as widespread as Star Wars was, but the same depth of connection, right? Those roots have to be there in order for the tree of Fallout to grow. I'm not reading from a script, by the way, just so you know. I never sat down and wrote these ridiculously flowery phrases. They're just coming out of me. I have some notes, but that's it. So playing Fallout in 1997 was just so freeing. I mean, this was a world that you could sink into and explore in different ways, in new ways, every time you played it, and come up with a different result every time you played it. A lot of games back then, if you read a game review in IGN or PC Gamer or whatever, they would rate it for replayability. I don't think they talk about that anymore. Like back then, that was like, oh yeah, this has good replayability. You'll play this more than once. Oh, I'm gonna get my money's worth. Fallout, ultimately high replayability. Every time you play that game, or many times that you replay that game, you're gonna get a very different experience. You're gonna find different quests, you're gonna find different stories, you're gonna be locked out of different parts of the game by choices you made. Your skills will allow you to do different things. You could go in different directions and do things in different orders and see how that changes things. And you can't do it all on a single playthrough. You have to get to the end of the game and start over in order to do it again a different way. That level of immersion, it created like a vacuum that kept pulling you back and pulling you back and pulling you back. And that's why I think that even in 97, people were spending hundreds of hours, thousands of hours playing Fallout and then Fallout 2. I don't think any of us had ever played a video game like that before. And I think it engendered in people a deep connection to the media, to the property. Partially because we were the right age, but also for another reason. Fallout feels like it was the first of its kind. Like there was nothing like it that came before. For fans who came on to the series with Fallouts 3 and 4 or whatever, there were already first-person RPGs. It's like Bethesda's bread and butter. And lots of games have been set in these post-apocalyptic wastelands. If you came to the franchise on 3 or 4, did you have that sense that you were encountering something like an entirely new kind of media? That you were like the first people to set foot on an undiscovered continent? Or was it a very cool game that you liked a lot, which is a different thing? I know that old fans of things like Fallout and Star Wars and Star Trek and D&D can be shitty grognards, but I don't know. Is there something special about the relationship you have with media that you didn't just connect with, but didn't even think was possible before it existed? People who saw Star Wars in theaters when it came out, I don't think they were having their mind blown because, ooh, it was this really cool action-adventure sci-fi movie that had really neat effects. I think it was because no one thought such a movie could even ever exist before that. No one was eagerly awaiting the next amazing, groundbreaking sci-fi space romp because prior to Star Wars, there wasn't even such a thing. The closest you had was 2001, and while it is an amazing piece of cinema, there's absolutely nothing fun about 2001 at all, right? Like, people who started playing D&D in the 70s and early 80s, they were losing themselves into continents of the imagination that no one had ever even conceived of before, really. There wasn't any kind of an online discourse about how to be a good or a bad DM. There weren't failed attempts at Dungeons & Dragons inspired TV shows or movies or video games. There was no way to even know it existed until a friend of yours showed up with a bag of dice and a book and said, "I want to show you something." Fallout came along in 1997 in a world that was wholly unprepared for it and didn't even have expectations for it to arrive. From the first time I played Fallout until today, it has set the bar for the experience that I'm chasing with video games. Very few things have come close. I assume it's like chasing that first high. Nothing else can ever really compare. I don't know if that kind of thing happens in a person with media and games and whatever, that you already have some expectation of it existing, that you think it must be out there. I think that maybe is a very special kind of bond. I don't think it's just a case of, well, you encountered this when you were 14 or 15 or whatever, when your brain was still spongy. I mean, I do think that that's a big part of it, but I don't think that that's all of it. I think that there is something else there that happens when these special things are breathed into existence between the thing itself and the people who are there to witness its birth. Old-head, grognardy nerds who argue about their chosen fandom being diluted by the hands that have inherited the property to make new games and movies from it are, no doubt, the worst. I hate Me Too. But I think it is possible that there's a special relationship there that truly cannot be understood by other groups of people, whether they are new fans or the new people who are making the movies and the games. And I think maybe, unfortunately, maybe you should cut these assholes a little bit of slack. Anyway, that's what it was like to find Fallout in 1997. I hope this was fun. I hope you enjoyed this. Leave me a comment, like it, subscribe to it. It's Greg from HTD. Good night and good luck.